So I'm very excited to share with you guys today my project titled the East River Healthy Headwaters Assessment, a non-consumptive needs assessment. And so a non-consumptive needs assessment is an assessment of environmental and recreational uses of water. In my project, the goal was to try and identify as many potential issues impacting environmental and recreational uses of water as possible. And we'll get into what that means here. But first, I'd like to introduce you to the East River Watershed. And so it's definitely a headwaters watershed driven primarily by snowmelt off the Elk Mountains up here in the north end of the valley. And as it flows down through national forest land, it flows through municipalities, and water gets used in all sorts of ways. And the draining by the East River that's used for irrigation, for agriculture, until it comes down here to Almont, where the East and Taylor combine to make the Gunnison. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going through this. And so I'm going to give you a bit of a background on how I came to the project, the original objectives of the project, some of the methods I used in the project, the findings, and then kind of concluding with the lessons learned next step. So first of all, I always like to clarify what's consumptive versus non-consumptive. And so a consumptive use of water is any use that depletes a source at the point of appropriation or the point of diversion. So this is used for irrigation. This is water used for municipal and industrial uses. So non-consumptive use is every other use of water. And so it's the water that, the use that doesn't deplete the source at the point of appropriation and the point of use. So it's the water that allows the kayaker to send the waterfall, that floats a boat down the river, that the fisherman wades in. But it's also the water that sustains healthy ecosystems, maintains water quality and aquatic life. So it's all those other uses that water is important for. So a bit of the background. So I came about to this project through kind of watching the Colorado Water Plan get developed. Started in 2013, culminated last fall. And it was brought about by the realization that there was going to be a large gap between our water supply and our future demand under projections of continued population growth here in Colorado. And so the plan essentially was a holistic chance for the state of Colorado to holistically address this issue and provide for that future. And so the Colorado Water Conservation Board that was tasked with developing the plan picked on the basin roundtables. And so in Colorado, it's divided into 7 different water basins or divisions. And working within each of those basins to identify their needs and their gaps and their potential demand in the future. And as part of that, they also asked to identify all the issues affecting consumptive uses of water and all the issues affecting non-consumptive uses of water in the hopes that those issues can be addressed to ensure a healthy future. So the bulk of the water plan focused on consumptive use of water, which is pretty typical, but there was also a lot in there talking about non-consumptive uses of water and in highlighting the importance of that. And that's summed up very well in this quote taken from the water plan. The healthy watersheds, rivers, and streams and wildlife are vital to maintaining Colorado's quality of life and a robust economy. So that kind of gives you that sense that it is important to protect and identify these non-consumptive uses of water. Also within the Colorado's water plan is this call for stream management plans. Basically this is in the implementation phase that we're kind of entering into now, where the rubber meets the road essentially in developing management plans for smaller geographical areas, smaller watersheds, smaller basins, to identify their needs and then also to identify their future needs as well. So that'll come into play here in a second. And so to just kind of reiterate that, so this is kind of the flow, but the arrow can go both ways. But it is a legislative mandate to the Colorado Water Conservation Board to develop the Colorado Water Plan, working with the Interbasin Compact Committee, which is made up of representatives of those different basin roundtables. That is a board of stakeholders at the basin level. And then to a local level, and we're very fortunate here in the Gunnison area to have the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District that is tasked with protecting our water here in the Upper Gunnison Basin. And the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District has appropriated funds and has started initial scoping processes to develop a stream management plan in the East River watershed, hopefully here soon. So non-consumptive assessments. So there has been several attempts in the state to develop these different types of assessments, but the assessments come down to a question of scale and functionality. You can spend a lot of time on a very small reach of a stream learning all there is to know about environmental and recreational uses of water. In previous attempts, the statewide water supply initiative that came out in 2010 did kind of what I call the 10,000-foot overview, and basically compiled some data and produced a map that said this reach of this stream is important recreational values, this reach is important environmental values. But from that, you cannot extrapolate specific potential issues or identify specific restoration projects. And on the flip side of that, you have localized efforts. And so in the East River Watershed, we're very fortunate to have the Coal Creek Watershed Coalition that has spent a lot of time and resources on understanding everything there is to know really about Coal Creek, and now is expanded to the Slate River. But that effort is localized, and their focus has been historically narrow, focusing more on water quality and not a lot of the other non-consumptive uses. So the objectives of my project were pretty simple: to identify as many specific potential issues affecting non-consumptive uses of water or environmental recreational values, and identify a workable and repeatable model that can be used in other sub-basins here in the Upper Gunnison Basin as we develop more of these stream management plans. So I started by dividing the watershed into 9 sub-basins and zones along tributary drainage boundaries. And this was important to understand the kind of the bigger picture in the watershed, because each of these individual zones has its own unique issues. It has its own demands for water, it has its own demands for recreation, its own demands on development, on pressure to development, I should say. So, and the approach I took was kind of this lessons learned approach, with this idea that I was going to try to develop a model. So we kind of threw a bunch of things against the wall to see what stuck. And so I conducted surveys, I did a lot of stakeholder outreach, a lot of research, and then a lot of on-site, on-the-ground investigation. And my on-the-ground investigation, where I was identifying specific issues, the methods I used varied by the specific issue that I was looking at. And so lastly, I created a Google Earth interface to display the results of this. And so I think very spatially, and I like seeing maps, and I spend a lot of time on Google Earth. But when I was thinking about this, I looked at many different products to visually display the results of this assessment. And Google Earth I like because it's universal. A lot of people have access to it, and a lot of people can use it, and actually can go in there and manipulate and play with the data, and zoom around in it, which is a lot of fun. So these are some of the issues I considered in the non-consumptive assessment. And over here under the universal column, they're universal in that they were assessed equally across the entire watershed as much as practically possible. It was not physically possible to visit every foot of every stream and tributary and wetland in the entire watershed, but practically possible. And then over here in the restricted column, restricted or localized, by design, this assessment did not have the capability to adequately assess things like water quality or aquatic life and these geomorphology. And so I identified issues in these kind of categories, but they were solely identified through stakeholder engagement and research. And so here is a screenshot of kind of what that Google Earth interface looks like with the individual issues identified on a map. And so all those activities led to the identification of 254 potential issues, identified and highlighted general concerns in those different zones, but also in the watershed. And I developed a 9-step model for recreating this in other watersheds. So here's some pictures of some of the issues that were identified in the project. A lot of issues with roads and trails interacting with wetlands, point sources of pollution, barriers to stream connectivity, but then also recreational access, and some other recreational issues across the zone. And so here, this is kind of give you a better idea of that Google Earth interface and this work. We're going to start in Gunnison, we're going to fly to Almont, we're going to start cruising up the East River Valley, and you're going to start to see all these individual points on the map where specific issues identified. And so within this interface, you can actually click on an individual issue, and it'll come a summary of that issue and why it was identified. And so we're going to fly around, and yes, it's looking down valley. Here's Skyland. There's Crested View. I'm Crested View. we're going to kind of zoom out. And you can kind of see, how I was able to identify issues across, essentially across the entire watershed. So the results, I identified a 9-step model for a watershed assessment. And so this came out of my lessons learned in talking with stakeholders and actually going through the process and seeing how you could do this better. And it starts by defining the watershed and looking at what are the sub-basins or sub-areas within that watershed. And just understanding the scope of that watershed. And then conducting initial research into the past history of that watershed to understand the issues that have historically occurred in different issues around water supply and water administration and management. And then identifying key stakeholders. And key stakeholders are stakeholders that either have direct influence over the natural resources or have political or social influence that can generate the most issue identification or good material later. And reaching out to them and engaging them in interviews and talking with them about what they're seeing on the ground as potential issues. And then following that up with on-site investigation to verify what has been identified by stakeholders, but also to original identification. And then integrating known information, known water quality, known water supply, basically that background research, and kind of bringing that all together into one place. And then develop those findings and take those back to the stakeholders for their review and their input, and to see what may have been missed or talk about specific issues. And then integration of the findings with watershed groups. And so, once again, we're trying to integrate these findings with the stream management planning process that the Upper Gunnison is going through currently. So, limitations and next steps. So there's a lot of limitations to this. Obviously, there's a lot of limitations to this. And so, like I said, we're just, the East River Healthy Headwaters Assessment was trying to find that niche between that 10,000-foot view and the localized view. And can you do an assessment on an entire watershed in a reasonable amount of time, reasonable amount of money, but still come up with a solid product that can be useful? I think you can, but the issues that we identified are all very superficial. Every one of those issues would need further inspection and investigation to understand how much, if at all, they really impact non-consumptive use of the water, or what kind of steps might need to be taken to address those issues. And so that's definitely a big limitation. Another big limitation is working with stakeholders in water issues in generally. Water can be a sensitive subject with certain stakeholders, and working with them is important, and having access to private property was I found to be an issue, basically. And so this assessment may not work in areas where there's a lot of private land, and watershed where there's a lot of private land. And typically the private land in the West, most particularly, is the land along the rivers, along the streams, and everything else. So that could be a very big issue for this type of water assessment going forward. But in the East River watershed, there's large amounts of public land in the upper portions of the watershed. I was able to gain access to quite a bit of the private land as well through a lot of willing stakeholders that were interested in participating. And so once again, the stream management planning process is going to be So it is going to be critical in integrating this results into that as being that next step. And we're going to be developing these for the East River, for Taylor, for Ohio Creek, for Tumichi Creek, and all these other sub-basins within the Upper Gunnison Basin. And I'm really hoping that this type of assessment or something to this degree can be incorporated in all of those stream management planning processes. Once identified, these issues through that legislative flow can be brought forward for funding and help to address those types of issues. So with that, I'd like to thank my sponsors, High Country Conservation Advocates, Trout Unlimited. Without their help and support, I wouldn't have gotten near as far as I did. I'd like to thank my advisor, Dr. Jeffrey Sellen, and I'd like to thank my wife, Brianna, and my son, Salix, for putting up with me for the last 2 years.
So I work a lot on Colorado for bringing that up. And I think your last point about the stream management plans is important. I think I think the budget this year for implementation is maybe $1 million for environmental flows.
Yep.
And the estimate for taking the water plan where it needs to go is about 20 billion. So I just appreciate your, so we see what that means. And that means, building more water projects. So I think, I just want to, it's more of a comment, but a thank you, because I think this is important information. And like I said, it's really detailed. And obviously that detail is not going to get relayed, in legislation, but I think it's an important part of the step to make that argument that that needs to be more than $1 million.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So a lot of the funding for this is tied to severance taxes that comes from oil and gas revenue, which, as everyone is kind of maybe knows, is kind of taking a big nosedive. And all these 7 different basins in the state are all working to try to implement the Colorado's water plan right now, and so they're all kind of fighting for the same dwindling pot of funding to try and leverage those resources. The Upper Gunnison set aside $75,000 this year that they were hoping to leverage with the severance tax money to try and implement these stream management plans.
Hi, Gene Siegel with National Park Service. On your list of 250 variables you work with, I hope aquatic invasive species is in that list.
Yeah.
I realize you can't look at everything all the time.
It kind of came under like aquatic life.
There you go.
Yeah, it kind of fell under aquatic life, and so I struggled with that a little bit. As like I could differentiate each individual category, and I tried to make it more digestible, I guess, by trying to accumulate categories that kind of had multiple levels of meaning like that.
Great. Yeah. Aquatic invasives have the ability to change the way we use water in the West, and it's something that if it's not on everyone's radar, it should be.
Yep, absolutely agree. Yes, Gordon.
Could you speak to a little bit to how the project will continue, or how you're passing it on to different stakeholders in the community?
Yeah.
You've gathered so much great information. How's that transferred?
Well, so with my community sponsor being High Country Conservation Advocates, they can take this and say, and hold on to this and say, these are still the projects we have to address. We never fully address these. That is one scenario, and I think this is almost the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is really that these findings will get integrated into that stream management planning process that we're developing. And so I'm part of a committee that's working on the scoping process on trying to develop what a stream management plan looks like. Because we don't even know what a stream management plan looks like. The CARL is going to release guidance later this year on what those things might entail. And so hopefully we'll get that, those findings will be integrated into that, and at least be as part of the East River Watershed Stream Management Plan. I really hope that similar assessments can be done on Tamichi and Ohio Creek and all these other tributaries that ultimately are more important or have maybe more issues than even the East in their own stream management planning processes. So that is kind of really that next step. And lots of great graduate projects for years to come in these assessments. So, yeah, time for another.
What was the most significant barrier that you ended up facing in your project, and how did you overcome it?
Significant barrier was political. As I was saying, water is a sensitive subject, and it can be hard to talk about, especially environmental non-consumptive uses of water with certain demographics. And to overcome it, I just persevered. I mean, there was a lot of points where I got kind of turned around maybe, or maybe ran into a wall, but I just turned the corner and went the other way. Some of the work that I did was not able to move forward as fast as I was planning it for this spring due to political issues on the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy's board, for example, which is fine. It's a learning process, and it's all about education. And I think once we start seeing that education come up, even with these different stakeholders, that they understand that addressing these are important to them as well. Thank you.